holds nature's true power. Rude! You try my patience! Rise, my elemental friend!
My symphony, I adore it.
Be wary of the ground you walk on.
Fine then, I'll leave.
Until we achieve peace, we must fight for a better tomorrow.
Lands. The land fights for us. The land shall conquer you! Harness the elements! Aggression. The land fights for us. comfort in the land. The land shall conquer you. Behold nature's true power. Enough! Do not underestimate my fortitude. Forgive me.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy here from MTG. We like it a magic. You know what? Two things, actually. First of all, welcome to the official beginning of rotation proof season. That's a thing we're doing right now, because who wants to look at decks with cards that are just not going to even be playable in like a month? So we're doing that. But also, fun fact about the channel, did you know we haven't done a Selesnya deck in almost a year? That's crazy. It blew my mind when I look back over the back catalog of videos. It's been long enough to birth a baby since the last time we did a Selesnya video. So you know what? Let's bow at the altar today to do. I couldn't come up with a joke for this deck theme at the beginning of the video. So I hope that you enjoy my insertion of telling you that there's no joke instead of. Anyway, we're gonna talk about rotation-proof green-white gods today. Well, Ziggy left, but Waverly jumped up here, so I guess that's good. But she won't be here long. She's never here for long. Don't get used to her. Yeah, don't give me that look. You already want to leave. I'll let you go. You got your freedom, baby girl. Anyway, today we're mostly here to talk about two creatures, Oketra and Ronus. Ronus and Oketra, mighty and powerful gods. Well, I got plenty to say about both of these things, but my channel's philosophy is usually to focus on the cat first. That's what we're going to do here. Kiki shows us that she loves us in a variety of ways, but mostly by getting us 4/4s whenever we drop a creature. So we're going to make sure that that happens as often as possible. So I'll let you know right up front. We're playing 36 creatures in this main deck. Every single non-land card is a creature, but we're doing that for reasons other than just Oketra. We actually have a card in the main deck that kind of forces us to only play creatures. We'll get to it a little bit later, but we want to make sure that every draw, especially once we do drop an Oketra, is as live as possible. And the best way of doing that is just to play nothing but creatures in the first place. So in that way, we get as much value out of the cat as possible. Another important philosophy of the channel, if you haven't noticed. Even when she's not creating a bunch of extra creatures for you and stuff, she's still a beast in combat. She's got claws when it comes to attacking. She's functionally 6 power, and you can sometimes increase the power even more than that. She just gets exponentially better at dealing combat damage, and she's really difficult to deal with forever for your opponent. She just keeps coming back, so it's a solid creature even if it's not creating value for you, but if it is, then it's just really difficult to deal with a board full of 4/4s plus whatever else you're playing. Now, Kiki might be the one I have more like personal affinity just because I like the card, but it's a card that's just as important is obviously Rozone here. We've got a bunch of creatures in the deck. I've already said that, right? 36 creatures, and a lot of them have relatively high power, or can have relatively high power at some point in the game. So the ability to just be like, boosh, you know, just get through with a board full of things is a way to win the game pretty easily some of the times. And that's exactly what Ronus can do. Not only is this a big, meaty creature, 5/5 Death Touch, just another crazy card in combat, but it's really difficult to deal with forever, and if your opponent does deal with it, you put it, you tuck it 3 deep there, then they know that at some point in the next turn or two, they're going to have to deal with this ETB trigger again, and sometimes that can be really hard for them to do anything about. Sometimes you don't even have to have a board full of creatures to really maximize the effect of a Ronus, especially if you get it in the relative early or mid-game. Like, check out this game, where we drop a Ronus and suddenly we can swing for 18 with 2 creatures. Pretty crazy. It's not like we have a huge board of guys here or anything, but it's just enough to take out 2 of our opponent's creatures and set us up to win on the next turn. So now that we know the 2 cards at the top of the concept, let's sort of build from there down, because we have to fill 32 slots, preferably with nothing but creatures. And what's the best way to do that in this color combination? Well, I think the best way to start is probably with Mana Dorks. So I went 4 copies of Pinky and 3 copies of Inky, who I don't like quite as much in this deck, but I still think these 2 mana rampers are a necessary evil in this deck. We've got some big 4-mana creatures that we want to ramp into, and of course, we've got our 2 gods, both of which cost 5 mana. Getting them on turn 4 makes them a lot more palatable, so I want to play mana rampers in the first place, but I think they kind of work for different reasons with the 2 gods that we've chosen to play. Mostly, if we've already got an Oketra in play, that means that anytime we draw a Mana Dork in the late game, it's still going to be a really live draw, because we get a free 4/4 off of it for just effectively a 2-mana investment. That's really nice. But let's say we already have them on the battlefield and we draw Aronas in the late game. Well, if we've adapted Incubation Druid, it smashes in for 6. Even Paradise Druid comes in for 4 in that instance when you pair with Aronas. So both of these have their advantages along with the 2 gods that we're playing, aside from just ramping into them. But we naturally want that too. These turn 2 mana dorks are just kind of a necessary evil because we're trying to ramp into 4 drops and 5 drops, and those are the best games. You know, we get a turn 2 mana dork and we ramp into a 4 drop and we ramp into a god. Those are just the best starts we can possibly get. So you kind of have to really adjust the amount of these that you play upwards. Now, speaking of 4 drops, by the way, in the best possible starts we can get, yada yada, we're playing 4 copies of Nullhide Ferox. Now, this is actually probably the best card in the entire game. And it also just happens to be the card that calls for us to play pretty much nothing but creatures in our non-land sleeve in this deck. But again, that's kind of okay. We want to maximize the usefulness of cards like Oketa and Aronas. That kind of already calls for playing a lot of creatures anyway. And Ferox's like huge stats and basic hexproof, yeah, they can get rid of it, but it costs them a fair amount of mana if they want to do that at any relatively early point in the game. So, especially if you're able to get it on turn 3, then that's effectively hexproof for 2 turns that really matter. And those things really offset the fact that it just kind of forces us into playing nothing but creatures. I know that some like Gruul decks that play Ferox will play a couple of Domries or even some Domries Ambush here and there, Collision Colossus, but I just hate it. I hate drawing like Prison Realm while I have a Ferox out. I cannot stand it. So I would rather, just for personal preference here, just play nothing but creatures. But again, we're rewarded richly in this deck for doing that, because the main cards we're building around want us to do that anyways. There's a few more big creatures that we're playing in the deck. We're not quite done because I've also worked in 3 copies of Voracious Hydra. A slight edit there. I've actually worked it down to 3 copies. Started with 4 in the main deck, moved 1 to the sideboard, because you won't always need a removal piece like this, but it is important to have. Sometimes even in the kind of early game. There are games where I've picked off a Llanowar Elves in early turns after a Paradise Druid or something. Just to make sure that they don't get any more ramp, and it's just this huge tempo move. Plus, obviously, this works crazy well with both of our premier gods in the deck. You know, we drop it when we have an Oketa out, we can kill something, get a big creature of our own, and a 4/4 on top of that. It's just a ridiculous amount of value, and if we make it relatively big and then drop Aronas, well, that's pretty crazy. That could be game over, especially if we elected to double its power when it came onto the battlefield. There's a lot of good interactions with Hydra in this deck, and I want to play a fair amount of creatures that sort of function as spells, because we don't have the luxury of playing spells in this deck to begin with. So it's important to play some removal, and Hydra is a very good piece at doing just that, while almost always 2 for 1 your opponent.
Hurry! This
is just better than a Ravenous Chupacabra in a lot of situations, and it's actually a pretty good endorsement for a card. Now, I'm also on 4 copies of Nightpack Ambush in the 4-drop slot here. Allow me to kind of justify this. I think that some people might balk at the inclusion of this card, but again, we need creatures that function as spells, and this is kind of that for a few reasons. Just like Voracious Hydra, we can use this as removal. If our opponent tries to swing in on us with an inferior creature, boom, Nightpack Ambusher right then and there will take out something in much the same way a Voracious Hydra or Ravenous Chupacabra will. So I think it's an important card for that function. But as we move through the deck, you'll also notice that a lot of our creatures have activated abilities. You know, we're playing a few things in this deck that make it so that we don't have to do anything on our turn, but we can still get actual value. You know, like we can just let our turn pass, get our wolf, and then maybe adapt a creature and use a creature's activated ability on our opponent's turn, or even on our turn. Still doesn't count as casting a spell, so we'll get our wolf regardless.
That's more like it.
Another thing that I like about this card, just in practice, something that I didn't see without playing with it first, is that in this deck, this card allows you to hold back cards in your hand and not play them on your turn, and that's actually kind of a good thing. If you get a wolf or 2 or 3 out plus an ambusher, your opponent is more or less forced to deal with it, sweep the board somehow. And if they do, then you still have a handful of creatures and such that you didn't play on your turn, so you can get right back on board. And it sounds like it's asynergistic, but it actually works out really well. There's also the fact that pretty much any creature with flash is going to be good with both of our gods. It's especially good with Oketra, because if you're able to play a Nightpack Ambusher with an Oketra in play, say on your opponent's combat step, you also get a 4/4 to block with, and that can just be a blowout play. So I love creatures with flash with Oketra, and that seems obvious, but actually with Ronus we've been able to pull off some cool stuff too, like you play a Nightback Ambusher at the opponent's instep, and then you play a Ronus on your main phase, which means that the Ambusher can swing for 8, just kind of out of nowhere. And we actually did that here to kill this Sorin, but there's plenty of situations where you can do this just to hit your opponent in the face for 8 or whatever. It's actually a much better interaction than you might think. You might not see it at first, but this card works really well with Ronus too. But continuing on the theme of creatures that are effectively spells, I'm also playing 3 copies of Hanged Execution. Now, I gotta bring some clips along to justify this card too, because this is another one I think people will be like, yeesh about. And I do think if you were going Bant with this deck and adjusting the mana base a little bit, Deputy of Detention would probably be a better card in this slot, and you get to play Hydroid Krasis in that deck, which is just yum. At the same time, while we're just green-white, I think that Hanged Executioner has been a pretty good card. It's pulled its weight for me in a few different ways so far. There are games where it's killed a Drakaseth against Reanimator. That was pretty cool. Like, there was a game where it exiled a Lyra and effectively won the game for us, but there's also a really cool interaction between Nightpack Ambusher and Hanged Executioner. If you just play Hanged Executioner on turn 3, and then turn 4 you hold up your mana to play Nightpack Ambusher. This way, you can effectively, at your opponent's end step, either play a Nightpack Ambusher or kill one of their creatures. If it's important, you didn't waste your turn 4 because you have multiple options open to you. Either kill something and exile it forever, or just play Nightpack Ambusher during your opponent's combat step or something. Both are very good options, and it leads to an interesting little play sequence. But we do have to fill out our 3-drop slot here a little bit. We want to play a 2-drop Mana Ramper on turn 2 and effectively skip the 3-drop slot, but it won't happen every time, so I at least want 6 3-drops to kind of pad things out here. And I think Thrashing Brontodon is a good one. It is an M20, so it's legal to play after rotation hits. And it's yet another creature that kind of functions as a spell if we do have to take out the odd artifact or enchantment. It's not like they stop printing those after rotation or anything, so it can be important for that reason some of the time. But it's also just a fairly big body on turn 3 that's a roadblock against aggro decks and also attacks, respectively, especially if you're able to drop a Ronus. Thrashing Brontodon swings for 6, so pretty decent card in the 3-drop slot. From what we know so far, some of these slots, like Execution, Thrashing Brontodon, and even a few other slots in the deck we're about to get to here, are flexible and can be replaced with cards from Throne of Eldraine, but for the time being, these are very, very functional 3-drops, especially Brontodon. But going back a little bit to the 2-drop slot, I'm going to play 4 copies of Growth Chamber Guardian along with all of the 2-drop Mana Dorks that we're playing. I want to play at least 10, if not a couple of more 2-drop creatures in the deck, so I think this is a good way to pad things out if we don't get a Mana Dork on turn 2. Plus, this is a great draw in the early game, always, or in the late game, pardon me. If you draw this on anywhere past turn 5, basically, then it's even more live than it would normally be because you can play it and still have the mana to adapt it. So it's effectively a 4/4 that draws you another one. You have a catcher out, play a Growth Chamber Guardian, get a 4/4, adapt it, make it a 4/4, go get another Growth Chamber Guardian, play it, get another 4/4. It's just crazy the work that this can do if you have a PQ out. So it's good for that reason, but it's also a fine turn 2 play, and anytime you top deck it in the late game, it's going to be a great draw. But the last non-land in the deck is actually the card I think can probably be replaced the most, if I'm being honest with myself and all of you, and that's Pelt Collector. Now, there were games, as you see here, where Pelt Collector can get to 4 or 5 power really easily. It can be a good attacker. Obviously, if we go, say, Pelt Collector into Paradise Druid, into Nullhide Ferox, then in that game, Pelt Collector has performed admirably for us. But if we go Pelt Collector into Incubation Druid, into Hanged Executioner, that feels really, really bad. So, I just don't know that Pelt Collector is the best card in the deck. There are definitely a lot of games where it's pulled its weight. Showed you the clip earlier where we're able to swing with like a billion power Pelt Collector because of Ronus in the early to mid game. So again, there have been games where Pelt Collector is a very effective card, and double Pelt Collector starts are pretty decent and all that. But there are also ways that the deck is set up to not get very good starts with Pelt Collector. So I'd like to see this one drop replaced in the long run. But again, I can't really fuss too much about it because it's done its fair share of the workload. Now, there are 24 lands in this deck, and I've gone back and forth between 25 lands, 2 Incubation Druid, and 3 Incubation Druid, 24 lands. But I think I'd rather have more creatures in this deck for obvious reasons. If we can get away with 24, I think we should. Plus, we still have 16 green sources for all the cards with double green in the deck that we have to cast. Plus, pretty much guaranteeing that we have to have green mana on turn 2. So that's pretty much cinched up. We also have 12 white sources. Doesn't sound like much, but we don't have too many white cards in the deck. We have to have double white for our Ketra, but that's okay. We got Paradise Druid. And if we have one white source, an Incubation Druid will make sure that we can cast this. So cast a Ketra. I don't know why I'm looking at this card that's not on screen. But anyway, in summary, we have plenty of sources to cast the cards that we have in our deck. And that's all that you need. Now here's our sideboard, which presents the same problem as the main deck. Mostly, we want to have creatures in this sideboard. I just don't want to play. I just don't want to draw Prison Realm, y'all. I just don't. We have a Nullhide Ferox out. It's just the worst feeling in the world. It somehow feels worse than Pelt Collector into Incubation Druid, if that's possible. So I just don't want to risk it. We're going to play creatures in the sideboard that, again, mostly function as spells. Crawl Harpooner, which I'll play with full complement of. We lost some games in testing, as is bound to happen, but very often we'll lose to flyers because a lot of our creatures sit on the ground for the most part, aside from Hanged Executioner. So we've got to have some sort of game against aerial decks, which there are a few of in the format of just decks that play big flyers. Crawl Harpooner is great and is a great way of growing your Pelt Collector on turn 2. I'll point that out. But there's also the 4th copy of Thrashing Brontodon. We do that, like the 4th copy of Voracious Hydra for aggro matchups and such. There's also Shifting Ceratops, something else that just exponentially increases our game against blue decks, which turns out there's a bunch of in the format. It's also important to have a creature that can gain trample because we have Ronus in the deck. So keep that in mind too. Shifting Ceratops is great, and like I said earlier, we need defense against flyers, and Shifting Ceratops also provides that. It's just a perfect card for our sideboard. And Tulsimir as well to finish things off. This ended up in the main deck, old Tulsi Gabbard, the professor here, but it didn't quite jive in the main deck. You don't need it in every game, and it's kind of it crowds our 5-drop slot in the main deck, so I'll just put it in against aggro when we need to kill creatures and basically have 3-for-1 the opponent, and sometimes even 4-for-1 if we're able to get a 4-4 off of Ketra when we play this. It can just be a huge blowout play, but it's not guaranteed to be that in every game, so we'll just throw one copy in the sideboard. But here are your power rankings. The final score of 63. Not too bad, because the deck is actually a lot cheaper than it looks. You may have noticed all the rares and even mythics in this deck as we went through. It is kind of tough to build on Arena, I'll give you that much, but at the same time, in real life, it's like in paper, let's put it that way, the deck is only about $125 to build. Not budget or anything, but definitely not on the high end of the most competitive decks, not even close. So I don't think we can call 125 budget, but it's a lot better than it looks when you see this giant pile of rares and mythics. There's actually, fun fact, not a single common in the entire 75 of this list. So 125 ain't bad, and again, all those rares and mythics lead to a pretty high power score. It's very close to 7, I'm not going to lie to you, but at the same time, we've got Ferox, 2 different gods, Shifting Ceratops in the sideboard, not to mention a ton of important cards in the main, like Nightpack Ambusher, just a bunch of really good stuff, like even Paradise Druid and Incubation Druid to a relatively high power score. That said, we're not super speedy unless we get exactly the start we want, which is basically Paradise Druid into Nullhide Ferox, into Ronus, and even then, we don't necessarily win the game right then and there, so I can't exactly call the deck fast. And even though there are a bunch of little synergies in the deck, I also can't call the deck exactly synergy driven. Now, there are some cards that force synergy, like the gods and Nullhide Ferox, but you can't, at the end of the day, call playing a bunch of creatures synergy. As far as versatility, same deal, you know, it's kind of a curve-out mid-range or ramp deck, and those decks aren't the most versatile decks in the world, especially when we just don't get to play spells. So, our best games are the games where we just don't even interact with our opponent. Yeah, whatever, the Pelt Collector, Paradise Druid, Nullhide Ferox, Ketra, do I win yet? Like, those are the games we want to play, and they don't involve much interaction, so we're not really what I would call versatile. But we are what I would call resilient. There are going to be a lot of games against aggro where we take some lumps in the early game and then we just go, oh, with Nullhide Ferox, oh, Ketrel, whoops, what do you do? What do you do on the next couple of turns if you're actually able to, allowed to live until turn 6 and you untap with that Ketrel play? You can turn the tide really, really fast, but it's just a matter of living that long. That said, if you can draw the game out just enough, and that's where Voracious Hydra, killing that 2 toughness guy does come into play some of the time. Hanged Executioner, wasting your 4th turn to kill the biggest creature on their side of the table. That does matter some of the time. So I will say that in terms of resiliency, sometimes there are things we have to do that we'd otherwise not want to do, but they lend to a good resiliency in the late. We can just get to turn 6. We can turn things around. Now, even though the speed isn't high, the offense is because we just play a bunch of creatures. We naturally have a relatively high offense because with 36 creatures, every non-land that we draw has offensive potential. As far as defense goes, Voracious Hydra, Nightpack Ambusher can function as removal on occasion. Hanged Executioner is removal that we'd rather not play because it basically eats up 2 of our turns to kill 1 thing. But some games that can really be important. Like here's a game, for instance, just in the middle of the power rankings, where we're able to kill a Dreadhorde Arcanist with a Hanged Executioner, and their whole deck is based around Dreadhorde Arcanist. So against decks like that, a card like Executioner is just top-notch. So do keep that in mind. This can be a very important card some of the time. Or like against Reanimate, where we killed that Dracusis. Their entire game plan is to get Dracusis on turn 4. They did that. Still couldn't win because we had Hanged Executioner out. So this card will pull its weight some of its time and all that, but I can't really give the deck a high defense score either. Now in game 1, we have the benefit of a few things. First of all, if we draw gods, those are kind of just good if we can get to them. Against darn near anything. We resolve them against control, and they're going to be a headache for control to deal with. We get to them against aggro, they're going to be really hard for aggro to deal with. They turn around the game. So game 1, we also have the benefit too of being a deck that no one's game planned for. This is not a deck that exists. it might exist in the next format, but for right now, this is not necessarily a deck that anyone's made any concessions for, and that helps it out in game 1. And we occupy the turn 5, turn 6 space pretty much better than any deck in the format, and if we can set ourselves up for that space, we win game 1 pretty easily. That said, let me finally move on to the board story here. I think that a lot of mid-range decks usually rely on their sideboard, and we're doing exactly that too, but we're much more easy to game plan for in game 2 because sweepers really just hurt us badly. Even though we have gods in the deck, sweepers hurt so bad, and if our opponent has any sort of real resources in their deck for dealing with aggro or mid-range, we don't necessarily fall to them immediately, but we are very susceptible. And finally, consistency. Now, we are an 8 here, a fairly high consistency, but we do have 2 colors, only 1 dual land, and that can be an issue some of the times. But the mana hasn't been the real problem in the deck. The real problem is these starts like Pelt Collector and Incubation Druid and Hanged Executioner, and those starts don't feel great, but again, we got a whole other set coming out, so I'm hoping that some of these problems are addressed in that set. There are starts in this deck that aren't super consistent, and sometimes drawing Pelt Collector in the late game isn't great if you don't have a catcher out, so I'm not going to pretend the deck has all the consistency, but for the most part, we have tried to sort of weight things towards the Paradise Druid Nullhide Ferox God.
Oh, hello. Please, come in. Thank you so much for seeing me after class. You see, I wanted to talk to you about how well you're doing in Magic the Gathering. Or rather, how well you're not doing. It's okay. Magic the Gathering isn't just a game, it's the most complex game. One that requires commitment, studying, and constant practice in order to just be, okay at it. I can see that you're struggling with this, and I'd like to help out. As we often get wrapped up in the more advanced aspects of Magic the Gathering's skill and gameplay, there are also many simple tips and tricks that often go overlooked. And yet, these can absolutely make you a better player. Presented here are 7 quick tips to becoming a better Magic the Gathering player. If you'd like more advanced lessons, please check out my extensive Tolarian tutor library, which is just that. Let's begin with a basic concept that is so often overlooked and ignored, yet will make your Magic life so much better. Number 1. Organize your board. It may seem obvious, but it is often so obvious that many Magic the Gathering players just disregard it, and to their own detriment. Organize your board. Organizing your board provides you, the player, with clarity of cards and game state. With Magic the Gathering being so complicated, it can often feel overwhelming to maintain a clear and concise board state, but it is critical that we always do so. Why? Well, more than anything, a clear and organized board state helps you avoid mistakes. For instance, having your mana base inconsistent or otherwise haphazardly strewn about your board increases the likelihood of error when assessing your mana. By laying your lands out in a straight line with the untapped lands laced together like so, this will force you to be more aware of which lands you are tapping when casting your spells. It will prevent you from accidentally tapping lands of a specific color that you might need to cast other spells. For example, accidentally tapping all your black sources when you have another black spell that you would like to cast. By keeping information clear and organized this way, you better understand what is in front of you and are less likely to err. This too is true for things like triggers of permanence on your board. An organized board helps you not miss triggers. Placing permanents such as Search for Azcanta by your library acts as a reminder as you go to draw. Since this card has an upkeep trigger, having it next to your library means you are less likely to forget before you draw for turn. If you simply cast the card and place it haphazardly on your board, you are more likely to forget about this trigger. And as I covered in my Magic Life Hacks video, using a counter on top of your library can also help you remember triggers such as Scry before draw and other upkeep effects. Next up is one of the most skill-intensive parts of Magic the Gathering, mulligans. The easiest way to get better at mulligans is to draw better hands. Stop drawing bad hands so often, just draw better hands instead. In lieu of this, you can also remember that when considering whether to mulligan, you should determine whether or not you have possible plays, not just if you have a decent ratio of spells to land. Asking yourself if you have the right ratio of spells to land is the first step in mulliganing, but this is the next, and it is extremely critical to becoming a better Magic the Gathering player. Ask yourself, even if you have a good mix of spells and lands, if you were not going to draw any additional cards, what would your first 3 to 4 turns of this game look like? Oftentimes, we might accept an opening hand that has 2 to 3 lands but does not have any spells that will impact the game in any meaningful way. These might be higher costed cards, or highly situational cards, or just pieces to a combo. Either way, if we were somehow not going to draw any additional cards, and our opening hand would essentially not allow us to do anything meaningful in the game, such as play a creature or counter a spell, then we should consider mulliganing for a more effective hand. While you will of course get to draw additional cards, mulliganing games either way costed cards or high impact magic, but this play so better hands number triggers such as intensive parts of Magic the Gathering. Mulligans. The easiest way to get better at mulligans is to draw better hands. Stop drawing bad hands so often, just draw better hands instead. In lieu of this, you can also remember that when considering whether to mulligan, you should determine whether or not you have possible plays, not just if you have a decent ratio of spells to land. Asking yourself if you have the right ratio of spells to land is the first step in mulliganing, but this is the next, and it is extremely critical to becoming a better Magic the Gathering player. Ask yourself, even if you have a good mix of spells and lands, if you were not going to draw any additional cards, what would your first 3 to 4 turns of this game look like? Oftentimes, we might accept an opening hand that has 2 to 3 lands, but does not have any spells that will impact the game in any meaningful way. These might be higher costed cards, or highly situational cards, or just pieces to a combo. Either way, if we were somehow not going to draw any additional cards, and our opening hand would essentially not allow us to do anything meaningful in the game, such as play a creature or counter a spell, then we should consider mulliganing for a more effective hand. While you will of course get to draw additional cards, there's no guarantee these cards will be relevant to the early game. So by keeping a hand you can essentially do nothing with early game, you increase the chances of allowing your opponent to run away with the game, gaining card advantage and advancing their board state while you simply play a land for turn and pass. Before you can win at Magic, you need to be able to play Magic. When mulliganing, ask yourself, does this hand let me play Magic without needing additional cards? Next, in order to get better at Magic the Gathering, you need to learn the cards and learn the decks. In the same way you need to know and understand what cards are in your own deck and what they do, it's equally important to know and understand what cards are in your opponent's deck and what they do. Since your opponent will not show you the content of their deck before a game of Magic, you have to equip yourself with the greatest weapon of all: knowledge. By knowing what cards are possibly in your opponent's deck, using factors such as the colors they are playing to narrow down the possibilities, you can make educated guesses as to what they might be holding in their hand, and then, based upon their available mana, what they might play. This is how you can be prepared for a counter or removal spell. This is how you can be prepared for a bomb being dropped and hopefully have your own answer waiting for it. Learn the cards. By knowing what a card such as Settle the Wreckage is, you can make a choice about whether to play around it. Recognizing that the card requires 2 white mana in order to cast, you can attack safely if you see that your opponent only has 1 white mana source. You know it's safe. Likewise, if they have 2 mana sources and 4 mana total available and are on white, then you need to consider the possibility that they are holding the card and act accordingly. But it's not just about memorizing cards. You need to understand how those cards work in the decks they are played in. And to do that, you need to play the decks yourself. The best way to get experience against a deck is to play with that deck. One of the best ways to learn about your opponent's deck is to try these decks yourself. Take a look at the commonly played lists that you can find on most websites and give them a try. The best way to learn how to defeat a deck is by learning how it works. The best way to learn how a deck wins is to practice playing that deck for yourself. Getting the experience playing with a deck is the best way to get experience playing against that deck. Proxy the decks or play with them on Arena. Build a deck library or a deck gauntlet, as I outlined in my video here. If you're playing something like Magic Arena, it's reasonably easy to get some experience testing as many decks as you can. Moving on. In order to face your enemies on the field of battle, you must first be prepared to face your fears. Oh yes, this is some real Art of War here. And number 4 is, don't be afraid to lose life. Your life is a resource. Winning a game at 1 life is the same as winning at 20. You don't get any bonus for winning at full life. You either win or you lose. That's the way the game goes. As such, you must be willing to sometimes spend life as a way to win. Oftentimes you see this when you are given the choice to save yourself damage at the cost of too great a resource. For example, early game, a 3/1 creature might be attacking you, and you might decide to use your removal spell on it so as not to lose life. However, taking 3 and keeping your answer for a likely larger threat is sometimes the best answer. As the board state develops, you will likely find a more suitable answer to the creature, such as simple 1/1 chump blockers. Meanwhile, you'll do better to be at 17 or even 14 life and holding on to a removal spell for an otherwise unstoppable bomb. When you destroy their 10/10 Hydroid Krasis with your cast down, you'll be glad you didn't waste it on their 3/1 card. Along these same lines, not being afraid to use your life as a resource will sometimes allow you to get into a winning race with your opponent. If you're at 15 life with 2/3/3 creatures, and your opponent is at 9 life with 2/3/3 creatures, and you both swing for full damage each turn, you are going to win that race. But if you were afraid to lose the life, and instead chose to block and trade, you allow them more time to stabilize and develop their board. Not losing life might have just cost you the game. Next up at number 5 is another tip so simple and obvious that it often gets overlooked or just disregarded, and that is the old adage, cast your spells during the second main phase. This is a tip I think most players know and maybe even practice, but don't fully understand, or are sometimes simply too lazy to ensure they practice this with patience. Let's start with why. Why is this so important? By waiting to cast during our second main phase, we protect against disruption on our creatures and spells. Opponents will use any instant speed removal during combat, and sometimes this removal might be in the form of a board wipe. If we cast our creatures before combat and such removal occurs, then creatures which otherwise wouldn't have been able to attack anyway would end up being removed needlessly. Waiting until after combat means waiting until after removal, and thus maintaining as much of a board state as possible. Now, let's say that you have a lightning bolt, and the total damage from your attacking creature plus the damage from the lightning bolt will equal lethal. Casting the lightning bolt before combat lets the opponent know that they must find some way to prevent the combat damage or else lose the game. But if we save our lightning bolt, then they might be willing to take the damage and go to 2 or 3 life, not knowing that we have an instant answer. And thus, casting during our second main phase protects not only us from disruption, but it disrupts our opponent in the form of knowledge. And thus, casting during our second main phase protects not only us from disruption, but it disrupts our opponent in the form of knowledge. By holding your land open, you are potentially making your opponent play around things you don't have, block creatures or allow creatures through that they shouldn't, and otherwise play less optimally. Number 6 is plan ahead. Don't use pump spells too early. As with waiting until the last moment to cast spells, understanding when to use pump and other abilities is critical. Don't pump a creature until the last moment. You want to give your opponent the opportunity to try and remove your creature so that you can possibly protect it by pumping in response. If you pump prematurely, then you give them the opportunity to perhaps lightning bolt in response. Another example of patience paying off in this way might be with an ability such as Simic Adapt. You might be eager to adapt to your Pteramander as soon as you are able, but your opponent can respond to this by trying to shock it out of the skies. Don't adapt until the last possible moment. Swing in and wait to see if they try and shock. And if they do, by adapting, you not only hit for heavy damage, but save the Pteramander in the process. Now, in many ways, all of these tips that I've mentioned so far can be said to connect to our last and thus most important of them all. Control your information. By controlling your information, be it your board state, the potential cards in your hand, the overall options available to you during a game, you gain the best advantage you can as a Magic the Gathering player. Tap your cards in such a way as you can bluff having cards you don't have. If you can leave blue open, leave it open to bluff a counterspell. If you can leave red open, leave it open to bluff a lightning bolt. Having the same art for the cards in your deck is a clever way to control information as well. Let's say your opponent looks at your hand using a spell such as Thoughtseize and sees that you have a lightning bolt, but then you draw and play a lightning bolt with different art. This then gives your opponent the added information that you have a second bolt in hand. By using the same artwork throughout your deck, you can subtly control information in this way. If you are clearly dead on board, don't just play your Planeswalker for the heck of it, revealing that your deck has one. Know when to scoop and move on to game 2 with as little information shown. The only reason to keep playing past being dead on board is to try and gain information on your opponent, even if it is just one card. And along those same lines, don't overkill your opponent. If a lightning bolt kills them, don't lightning bolt and then shock and then crackling doom for chuckles to rub in how dead they were. Only show them what you need to show them. You know, at the end of the day, while there's of course luck and variance in Magic the Gathering, overall, this is a game of skill. Don't expect to perform well simply by rolling the dice and hoping for the best. If that's your mentality, then don't expect to win anything except maybe the die roll. This is a game of great intellect, great knowledge, great information, great strategy, and greatest of all, skill. Pay attention to all the details, big and small, or get left behind. As I always say, it isn't about winning or losing. It's about getting better every time. Work on getting better. That's the real game.
And this program was made possible thanks to a sponsorship from Card Kingdom, as well as the Patreon support of viewers such as you. So thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Rudy, and I'll be your host today. And
this is Rummy's Corner. When boxing fans discuss the best pound-for-pound boxers in the world today, the two names that are most frequently mentioned for the top spot are Vasily Lomachenko and Terence Crawford. Usyk is the same discussion, as are guys like Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. Spence Jr. is in the mix too, and even a guy like Manny Pacquiao probably still deserves a spot in this discussion, following his solid performance in his recent 12-round split decision victory against Keith Thurman. Then we have Inoue Naoya. He too is certainly in the discussion, and having recently had the chance to binge watch all of his championship fights one after another, I'm beginning to wonder if this monster doesn't have the best claim as the greatest boxer in the world at this time. On April 6th, 2014, in just his sixth professional bout, Inoue challenged WBC Junior Flyweight champion Adrian Hernandez. Inoue began the fight patiently, and before long, he was landing some nice right hands coupled with some short explosive combinations. Inoue had seized command of the action in the opening round, and he carried that momentum throughout all of the early rounds. It wasn't until the fourth round that Hernandez finally began fighting effectively on offense. The champion was battling bravely, and he was putting forth some very spirited attacks. But Inoue was taking the punches well, and he was consistently firing back in menacing style. Towards the end of round 6, Inoue nailed Hernandez with a sweet right hand that dropped the champion. Hernandez made it to his feet, but he appeared badly confused and reluctant, which prompted referee Michael Griffin to wave it off. The fight was over. It was a 6th-round technical, and at the time of the stoppage, Inoue was pitching a 50-45 shutout on all three official scorecards. Inoue Naoya had just become the new WBC Junior Flyweight Champion of the world. On September 5th, 2014, Inoue made the first defense of his 108-pound WBC title against Witawas Besapian. This one was a tactical battle where Besapian was looking to land big, but Inoue was fighting a very disciplined fight. As the rounds progressed, Inoue started opening up with more and more well-timed combinations. It was a largely tactical affair, and Inoue was winning the battle of tactics, with a marvelous blend of technique, ring speed, and explosiveness. Inoue dropped Besapian in round 4 with some quick, crisp punching. Besapian survived the rest of the round without further incident, but he was absorbing a real beating. In round 6, another blistering combination from Inoue was punctuated by a devastating left of the body, and Besafe was down again. The challenger bravely battled on, but he was simply outgunned and outclassed. By the later rounds, it had largely become target practice for Inoue, and the referee had finally seen enough, officially waving it off for an 11th round technical knockout. On December 30th, 2014, Inoue jumped up classes to 115 pounds when he challenged WBO Junior Bantamweight champion Omar Andres Narvaez. Inoue started opening up with some heavy shots right out of the gate, and Narvaez was down less than 30 seconds into the contest. Narvaez made it to his feet, but he looked very badly dazed. Inoue was measured and patient as he methodically followed up and soon had Narvaez down again. The champion again beat the count, and amazingly he survived the rest of the round. About halfway through the second, Inoue dropped the champion again with a sweet counter left. As the second was drawing towards a close, Inoue unleashed an absolutely savage combination that was punctuated by 2 devastating body shots that had Narvaez down for the 4th and final time as referee Lou Moret counted him out. Inoue Noia had just become the new WBO Junior Bantamweight Champion of the world. On December 29th, 2015, Inoue made the first defense of his WBO 115-pound world title when he squared off against challenger Marlito Paredes. Right at the start, Inoue didn't waste any time putting together some nice thudding combinations. For his trademark, Inoue was doing an outstanding job mixing up his attacks while using a wide assortment of punches both upstairs and down. Inoue was jabbing well in round 6, and before long, he unloaded 2 quick, vicious assists that dropped the challenger. Paredes was slow to his feet, but he beat the count as an anxious Inoue was ready to pounce. And pounce he did, as another furious assault soon had Paredes down again. Referee Mike Ortega didn't like what he was seeing, and he waved it off mid-count. It was a second-round technical knockout, and the first defense of his junior bantamweight. On May 8, 2016, Inoue made the second defense of his WBO junior bantamweight title when he went up against challenger David Carmona. Inoue got off to his typically patient, explosive start, and Carmona was quickly on the defensive. This was a true battle of tactics that saw a lot of maneuvering for position. From the onset, Carmona was fighting a very smart fight, despite the fact that Inoue was doing the better work. There was a lot of jabbing and posturing from both boxers early on in the contest. Inoue realized he was in there with a sound technician, so he was frequently throwing just one punch at a time, while never overextending and never losing focus. Both boxers were landing, and both of them were having moments, but Inoue was consistently landing harder and sharper. He remained determined, and he was using excellent footwork and often winning the battle of the range, and he was frequently making Inoue miss just short. But even in the rounds where Carmona was doing his best work, he was still being outdone by the power of Inoue. During the later half of the scheduled 12th rounder, Inoue was more focused on jabbing, and he was jabbing with more authority. This approach greatly diminished Carmona's output. Whenever Inoue was consistently working behind the jab, he was usually controlling the action. And when he wasn't working behind the jab, Carmona was finding all sorts of ways to do some sneaky work. Inoue started opening up more later in the fight, and in the 12th and final round, Inoue began administering a savage beating. Carmona was absorbing some blistering punishment before he eventually succumbed to the assault. Carmona was down, and he survived the count, and he bravely managed to make it to the final bell. Inoue was awarded a unanimous decision victory, with 2 judges scoring the bout 118 to 109, and the other judge having it 116 to 1. On September 4th, 2016, Inoue made the third defense of his WBO junior bantamweight crown against Karun Jaropianlerd. Right out of the gate, Inoue was more active, more effective, and he was doing a fine job of making Jaropianlerd swing and miss. Inoue was outboxing the challenger, and he was dictating the terms of the range, distance, and tempo. This trend continued, and while Jaropianlerd sometimes had some decent isolated moments, by and large Inoue was in cruise control and he was having little difficulty keeping the action to his liking. Karun was having some of his better moments mid-fight, but he wasn't doing enough to win rounds. And in the rare instances where he was finding success, Inoue almost always came back with something heavier and more damaging. Inoue continued controlling the action by jabbing and moving and sometimes unloading. As round 10 was drawing near an end, Inoue unleashed a prolonged, relentless barrage of menacing punches that ultimately overwhelmed Jaropianlerd. Referee Mark Nelson counted him out, and it was a 10th round KO for Inoue. On December 30th, 2016, Inoue made the fourth defense of his WBO junior bantamweight title against challenger Kono Kohei. Inoue began the fight jabbing with authority and controlling the action. Kono had a few nice moments in the early going, but Inoue was having more moments and better moments. By round 3, Kono was trying hard and battling bravely, but Inoue was dominating the action with some clubbing combinations. To his credit, Kono continued doing everything he could, but he was being outmaneuvered and outpunched by a superior technician. Inoue was jabbing well in the 5th, and he began landing all types of sneaky shots. Kono went on the attack early in the 6th, and Inoue smashed him with a wicked counter left. Kono managed to beat the count, but shortly after, Inoue had Kono down again, and referee Robert Bird had seen enough. It was a 6th round technical knockout for Inoue. On May 21st, 2017, Inoue made the 5th defense of his WBO junior bantamweight crown against Ricardo Rodriguez. Things began tactically, with Inoue looking to control the distance with a nice jab, excellent footwork, and short explosive combinations. Rodriguez was trying to work his way inside to attack, but he wasn't especially effective. Inoue was comfortably in control of the action as he began dissecting Rodriguez with surgical-like precision. Early in round 3, Inoue dropped Rodriguez with a furious 3-punch combination. Ricardo was quick to his feet, but Inoue soon had him down again, compliments of a monster left hook. This time, Rodriguez would not complete the count. 3rd round knockout for Inoue. On September 9, 2017, Inoue made the 6th defense of his WBO junior bantamweight title on his American television debut against Antonio Nieves. Inoue started the fight strong, and he was controlling the action with a stellar jab and some beautiful short combinations. This set the tone of the fight, and the early rounds quickly transformed into a vintage effort from Inoue. As things progressed into the middle rounds, Inoue continued repeatedly nailing Nieves with a snappy jab, and he was also beginning to mix in some nice 2- and 3-punch combos for good measure. In round 5, Inoue dropped Nieves with a
In this land,
Nieves
we are
beat the
all
count,
connected.
and Inoue proceeded to start mercilessly
nature's
digging
true
left hooks
power.
to the body with frightening regularity. Nieves held on to survive the brutal round, but he continued absorbing a lot of punishment in round 6, which ultimately caused him to revert into full retreat. Inoue tried persuading him to step up, but Nieves wasn't taking the bait. He survived until the end of round 6, and his corner promptly stopped the fight. It was a 6th round TKO for Inoue. On December 30th, 2017, Inoue made the 7th defense of his WBO junior bantamweight crown against challenger Johan Boyo. In the opening round, Inoue was already managing to rattle the challenger with several short, heavy combinations. As the first round was nearing an end, Inoue clipped Boyo with a devastating left hand. Boyo beat the count, and the round was over. Inoue continued bringing the heat in round 2, and he had Boyo looking off balance and mighty uncomfortable. Early in the third, Inoue landed a crippling left to the body that resulted in a delayed reaction knockdown. Boyo bounced up quickly, but he appeared badly hurt. Inoue jumped on his wounded foe and soon had him down again after a furious assault. Boyo again bravely made it to his feet and battled on, but Inoue easily dropped him again, and the fight was over. It was a devastating third-round technical knockout for Inoue. On May 25th, 2018, Inoue moved up to 118 pounds when he challenged reigning WBA champion Jamie McDonald. The champion was looking to jab and move and keep things at range, and Inoue was patiently stalking forward. Inoue quickly caught up with McDonald, and he was landing some thunder to the body and head. Less than halfway through the round, Inoue wobbled the champion with a left hook high on the head, and then another two-punch combination floored the champion. McDonald made it to his feet, and cool as an assassin, Inoue began carving through him, and the referee waved it off just as McDonald timbered his way to the canvas. Inoue Noia had just become the new WBA Bantamweight Champion of the world. It was a devastating display of power and accuracy from Inoue, who is now a 3-division world champion. On October 7th, 2018, Inoue made the first defense of his WBA crown against challenger Juan Carlos As both boxers were still in the feeling out process, Inoue fired off a quick 1-2 that dropped the challenger. Piano was down, and he would not be beating the count. The fight was over. And in his most recent bout, on May 18, 2019, Inoue made the second defense of his WBA Bantamweight crown when he went up against Manny Rodriguez. It was yet another vintage powerhouse performance from Inoue. Early in round 2, Inoue landed a right to the body followed by a sledgehammer hook upstairs. Rodriguez was down. He made it to his feet, but he was quickly down again after a monster right to the body. Rodriguez was bloodied, and he looked badly hurt, but he bravely continued, and by this point he was already beaten, and Inoue effortlessly put the final touches on another masterpiece performance. Simply put, Inoue Noia is one of the most complete boxers in the game today. Inoue truly has it all. Exceptional footwork, superb positioning, an incredible understanding of range and distance. Defensively, he's very responsible. Superb punching technique with every punch in the bag. Fluid, powerful combinations. Absolutely menacing work to the body. Incredible timing with an extraordinary ability to land sharp counters. An extremely high ring IQ. And on top of all that, he has this devastating power in both hands.
Behold,
and even scarier yet, at 26 years old, Inoue still seems to be consistently improving his craft. I'm not entirely sure if Inoue is the one most deserving of the mythical title known as the pound-for-pound king. But if he isn't the best right now, he's definitely on a very short list. Inoue Noia is indeed awesome. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.
Since bursting onto the boxing scene in 2012, Japan's Naoya Inoue has been recognized as one of the sport's premier finishers.
Peano's eyes spinning like the reels on a fruit machine when that right hand landed.
Whether landing the left hook to the head or body, or outboxing trickier customers behind the jab, so far, Inoue has always found a way to prevail.
Looking to tee off with that right left hand of McDonald. Turns into the ropes again, and Luis Pabon, the referee, has jumped in and waved this off inside the first round.
Starting off at light flyweight, Naoya Inoue has traversed the lower weight, managing all manner of opposition while becoming a 3-division world champion.
Is Carly Rodriguez. Good straight shot. Left hand there just dumps Rodriguez down. It was short, it was sharp, and it was heavy.
With a mega fight against Filipino Nonito Donaire in the works, we take a look at the destructive power of the monster Naoya Inoue. Decent Filipino Kristen Omayao was brought in as a first professional test for the 19-year-old debutante. Inoue's vicious body assaults were playing havoc with Omayao all night. As the bout progressed, Inoue's ramrod spear jab was troubling Omayao's porous defense, and the visitor required to remain competitive. Inoue's brutal left hooks to the body put paid to the first of many victims of the Japanese monster.
The land shall conquer.
In only his 6th contest, Inoue was already boxing for world honors at light flyweight. Solid Mexican Hernandez was making the 6th defense of his WBC crown. Inoue needed just 6 dominant sessions to tear the title away. Busted up and covered in blood, every time Hernandez threw a combination, he was made to miss and pay a heavy price by Inoue's rapid return fire. Referee Michael Griffin compassionately waved off the bout with Hernandez thoroughly defeated. After flying into the history books by winning the WBC title in the fewest number of fights, Inoue was brimming with confidence ahead of his first defense. Opponent Watawa Spasapian was classic fare for a maiden challenger.
โดนหน้าผมว่าพอทนไหวแต่โดนโอ้ยนี่แหละครับได้ครับโตแล้วครับลุกลงไปครับโอ้ยคราวนี้เอาว่าโอ้ตัดลำตัวแม่จุกแล้วนะครับโอ้โหนี่แหละครับ
Brave Sapian lasted until the 11th round, when Inoue's relentless flurries finally took their toll.
โอ้ยยำตัวนี่แหละครับโดนย้ำเข้าไปครับโอ้กรรมการหยุดเลยครับกรรมการยุติเลยครับเตือนไม่ได้
Narvaez entered as the recognized #1 at super flyweight. Inoue moved up 2 weight classes to accommodate his growing frame. Once Inoue let go with the heavy shots of the club, the diminutive WBO champion never stood a chance.
Cannot be denied.
Dropped twice in the opener and twice again in the second, Narvaez was counted out on all 4. If experienced Narvaez was unable to weather the storm, then there was scant hope for little-known Parinas from the Philippines to fare any better. Parinas appeared intimidated from the start and never looked able to stand up to the raw firepower of the champion. Making Making the 5th defense of his 112-pound strap, Ohashi Promotions served up another lamb to the slaughter for their prize asset. Inoue immediately exposed the ability gap. Softening up the Mexican for 2 rounds, he was at his incisive best in the 3rd. Naoya's world-class left hook was once again causing mayhem as Rodriguez folded in the heat of Ariake Coliseum Arena. In his quest to mix with pound-for-pound talent Roman Gonzalez, Naoya Inoue traveled across the water to America.
Andre, this is what you did against Kovalev. When you saw that, you went right there, and here Inoue has it ready to go to the body. Yup, there it is.
Nieves was hurt in the 2nd round, dropped in the 5th, and punished with the head and body until his corner sensibly retired their man after the 6th.
It's going to be a technical knockout at the end of round 6 for Naoya Inoue. His 12th knockout in 14 fights.
In defense number 7 of their man's WBO super flyweight strap. Well-traveled Frenchman Yoann Boyo was drafted in for the job. Inoue declined to carry his overhand hook and proceeded to drop Boyo with his vaunted left hook in the 1st second.
Be wary.
Boyo had been dropped 4 times in total when the referee called a halt to the massacre in round 3. Long-reigning WBA regular bantamweight champion Jamie McDonald boasted 2 world title wins over Japanese opposition, but Inoue was a different animal.
At the moment, heavy left hand seemed to catch McDonald high on the head, almost on the top of the head down. His legs seem a little bit shaky here. A minute and a half into the 1st round of McDonald. Goes over from the left hand to the body.
Every heavy blow Inoue landed seemed to hurt the Englishman, who was disposed of in a single round.
With that right hand left hand of McDonald. Sags into the ropes again, and Luis Pavon, the referee, has jumped in and waved this off. Inside the 1st round, Jamie McDonald has been blown away by Noah Inoue. He's been slain by the monster.
In 2018, Inoue joined the World Boxing Super Series tournament at bantamweight to enhance his global brand and clean up on fellow champions. Veteran southpaw Juan Carlos Payano was first to feel the wrath.
Majority decision against
After disposing of Payano, a WBSS semifinal in Scotland was the next priority for Inoue. Vibrant IBF champion Emmanuel Rodriguez represented an extremely capable challenge.
Goodness me, the speed and power of those punches from Inoue. And there's a right hand gone in too from Inoue. This is a fearsome flurry, and he's got him on the left for the first time in his career.
The way Rodriguez was knocked out exemplified everything the monster is about.
Again is Rodriguez. Here comes Inoue. Oh, he's got it to the body. Oh, what a shot. Rodriguez. Surely he won't take much more than that. Surely. Oh, this is unbelievable for Inoue. 3rd time he's gone down. Rolled over. Rocked to the core by those punches. Another count. It's over. Michael Alexander waves it off in the 2nd.
This is Rob Tupper for Boxing Social. Delighted to be joined by Nissa Sowland. We're here in Glasgow in the immediate aftermath of a truly sensational night of boxing in the World Boxing Super Series. Nissa, was it good for you?
Yeah, it was very good. Thank you very much. I thought it was a great night, great fights. I think Inui is probably the best fighter I've ever seen live. Like
You're okay.
Absolutely unbelievable. It's precision, power, speed, everything. And the guy's, just only little, unbelievable.
It's the first time I've seen him live. The punches from ringside, it really did not sound like a bantamweight. Just how hard does that guy hit?
I don't know. I was actually thinking that to myself. Look, I'm 85 kilos. He's what, 53, 54, whatever it is. I said, like, maybe just challenge him to punch me. And I just want to feel like his power because I'm 30 kilos more than him, But I think he's going to be a multiple weight world champion. I mean, if you look at Pacquiao, I think he went up 8 or 9 weight classes. Maybe he doesn't have the height of Pacquiao, but